12 years ago, Mark and I were just two broke kids living in a cramped one-bedroom apartment in Seattle. I was working long hours as a freelance graphic designer, and Mark was a visionary. That's what he called himself. He was always chasing the next big tech idea. He was brilliant, I'll give him that, but he had zero business sense and even worse credit. In our first year of marriage, his first startup completely tanked. He lost everything. He was $100,000 in debt, depressed, and ready to give up. I held him while he cried on our cheap IKEA sofa. I promised him we would figure it out. A few months later, a miracle happened. An anonymous angel investment firm called Times Vanguard Equity Times reached out to Mark. They loved his new software pitch. They offered to clear his debts and give him $2 million in seed money to build his company in exchange for an 80% silent ownership stake. Mark was ecstatic. He signed the paperwork without hesitation. He became the face, the CEO, the 20% owner of a company that exploded overnight. Over the next decade, Mark's software became industry standard. The money rolled in. We moved from the tiny apartment to a sprawling mansion in Bellevue. We bought luxury cars. We took vacations to Bora Bora and the Amalfi Coast. But as the bank accounts grew, Mark shrank as a husband. He became obsessed with his own myth. He started doing interviews with Forbes and TechCrunch, calling himself a self-made titan. He forgot about the nights I stayed up debugging code with him. He forgot about the meals I cooked, the emotional support I provided, the foundation I built so he could fly. To the world, Mark was a genius. To Mark, I was just the wife. An accessory. A woman who was lucky to be along for the ride. The breaking point happened right after our 12th anniversary. I started noticing the classic signs. Late nights at the office, a suddenly locked phone, the sudden obsession with his physical appearance. I didn't have to hire a private investigator. Mark got sloppy. I found the hotel receipts in his coat pocket. He wasn't just having an affair. He had been seeing a 24-year-old marketing assistant from his office for over a year. When I confronted him, I expected apologies. I expected begging. Instead, he just looked at me with cold, dead eyes and shrugged. "I'm filing for divorce, Emma," he said, pouring himself a glass of scotch. "You have to understand, we're in different leagues now. I'm building an empire. You sit at home and paint watercolors. I need a partner who matches my current status." I felt like I had been punched in the stomach. "I built this life with you," I whispered. He actually laughed. "No, Emma, I built this life. Vanguard Equity funded me, and my brain made the millions. You were just here. My lawyer will be in touch." Mark's lawyer was brutal. He sent over a settlement offer that was frankly insulting. Mark wanted me out of the house in 30 days. He offered me a one-time payment of $200,000 and 5 years of minimal alimony. In the state of Washington, assets are usually split 50/50. But Mark had cleverly structured his finances. He claimed his 20% stake in the company was a separate asset, shielded by a web of legal technicalities his lawyers had set up. He argued that because I had never officially worked for the company, I wasn't entitled to a dime of its explosive growth. For 6 months, I played the victim perfectly. I let Mark strut around town with his new girlfriend. I let him tell our mutual friends that I was being greedy and unreasonable. I sat quietly in mediation meetings while his lawyer berated me, calling me a freeloader who was trying to steal a visionary's hard work. I never raised my voice. I just smiled, nodded, and waited for our day in court. Here is the thing Mark didn't know. 12 years ago, Right before Mark's first business failed, my grandfather passed away. My grandfather was a quiet, frugal man who lived in a modest house in Oregon. Nobody in our family knew that he had made some incredibly lucrative land investments in the 1970s. When the will was read, I was absolutely stunned to learn he had left his entire estate to me. It was a staggering amount of money. $8 million. I didn't tell Mark, not because I didn't trust him, but because Mark's ego was already incredibly fragile at that time. He was drowning in debt from his failed startup. If I had suddenly swooped in as his sugar mama, it would have destroyed his pride. I wanted him to succeed. I wanted him to feel like a man who had earned his victory. So, I went to a high-end wealth management firm in Seattle. I had them set up a blind trust. Then, I had my lawyers create an anonymous venture capital LLC. I named it Times Vanguard Equity. Yes, I was Vanguard Equity. I used my own inheritance to anonymously pay off my husband's debts. I was the one who gave him the $2 million seed money. I was the silent partner who owned 80% of his tech empire. For 12 years, I attended board meetings via a proxy lawyer. For 12 years, Mark sent quarterly financial reports to an email address that I secretly checked from my iPad in our living room. For 12 years, Mark thought he was working for a faceless group of Wall Street investors, never realizing his boss was sleeping in the bed right next to him. I kept the secret because I loved him. I wanted him to have his dream. But sitting in that courtroom, watching him try to leave me penniless so he could play sugar daddy to a 24-year-old, that love was completely, irreversibly dead. Back in the courtroom, Mark's lawyer, a slick guy named Richard, was pacing back and forth, finishing his opening statement to the judge. "Your Honor," Richard boomed, "my client is the sole reason for his financial success. His 20% equity in his company is his, and his alone. His wife has contributed nothing to this enterprise. She is merely seeking a payout she did not earn. We ask that the company be excluded entirely from the marital assets." Mark looked at me and gave a tiny, arrogant wink. My lawyer, an older, soft-spoken woman named Helen, stood up. She didn't pace. She simply handed a thick manila folder to the bailiff, who handed it up to the judge. "Your Honor," Helen said calmly, "we actually agree with opposing counsel. My client is not seeking half of Mr. Davis's 20% equity. We are perfectly fine letting him keep his minor share." Mark frowned. His lawyer looked confused. The judge opened the folder. He adjusted his glasses. He read the first page, then the second. The courtroom was so quiet you could hear the air conditioning humming. The judge looked up, staring directly at Mark. "Mr. Davis," the judge said, his voice echoing, "your counsel has repeatedly referred to you as the primary owner of this company. But according to these verified corporate filings, you only own 20%. The parent company, Vanguard Equity, owns 80%. Is that correct?" "Yes, Your Honor," Mark said, puffing out his chest. "Vanguard is an independent VC firm." The judge sighed. "Mr. Davis, Vanguard Equity is an LLC entirely owned by a single blind trust. A trust which, according to these documents, was established by your wife, Emma, 12 years ago using inherited funds." Pause for 3 seconds, for dramatic effect. Mark froze. He literally stopped breathing. "Excuse me?" Mark choked out. The judge looked at him with zero sympathy. "Your wife is Vanguard Equity. She owns 80% of your company. You work for her." The color violently drained from Mark's face. He looked like he was going to vomit. He turned to me, his eyes wide with a frantic, terrifying realization. His lawyer, Richard, started stammering. "Your Honor, This is... this is a shock. We request a recess. Denied, the judge snapped. Helen, my lawyer, finally spoke up, her voice slicing through the room like a scalpel. Your Honor, as the 80% majority shareholder, my client has called an emergency board meeting via proxy this morning. Effective as of 9 a.m., Mark Davis has been terminated as CEO for violating the moral turpitude clause in his contract due to his workplace affair with a subordinate. He is no longer employed by the company. I will never, for the rest of my life, forget the sound Mark made. It was this pathetic, breathless gasp. The man who had walked into that courtroom a self-made titan was suddenly unemployed, stripped of his title, and realizing his entire empire belonged to the woman he had just tried to throw away. Because the Vanguard equity funds came from an inheritance prior to the company's founding and were kept in a separate trust, they weren't considered marital property. Mark didn't just lose the divorce, he lost his identity. The settlement was swift after that. Suddenly, Mark had no income. His 20% equity was worthless without his massive CEO salary, especially since the board, meaning me, decided not to issue dividends for the foreseeable future. I kept the house. I kept the cars. Mark had to move into a tiny apartment. The 24-year-old marketing assistant, she dumped him 2 weeks after he lost his CEO title and the company credit card. Turns out, she wasn't quite as in love with a disgraced, unemployed, middle-aged man. I eventually sold the company to a larger tech conglomerate for a massive sum. I took that money, and I started a foundation that provides grants to female entrepreneurs. Sometimes, I drive past Mark's new apartment complex. I don't feel anger anymore. I just feel peace. They say hell hath no fury like a woman scorned. But let me tell you a secret. Fury is loud, and fury is messy. If you really want to win, you don't use fury. You use patience. You sit in silence. You let them underestimate you. You let them dig their own grave. And then you hand them the shovel. If you're watching this, and you are shrinking yourself so your partner can feel big, stop. Never hide your light, your money, or your power to protect someone else's ego. The right person will want to stand beside you, not step on you to look taller. Thank you so much for listening to my story. If this brought you some satisfaction, hit that like button and let me know in the comments how you would have handled this situation. Don't forget to subscribe for more intense stories. Take care of yourselves, and remember, always know your worth.